Walter Hale never raised his voice. He didn't need to. For 19 years, boardrooms went silent when he entered. Venture capitalists memorized his interviews. Tech journalists called him the Ghost King of Silicon Valley, powerful, present, untouchable. His company, Orionics Systems, secured everything that mattered. Hospitals, banks, government servers, Fortune 100 data centers. If your information needed protecting, it passed through Walter's encryption first. Cupertino bowed. Palo Alto listened. San Francisco paid attention. He lived in a penthouse that overlooked the valley like a throne room. His calendar was booked 18 months ahead. His signature could move markets. Control wasn't just his strategy. It was his identity. But before we dive in, don't just watch, please hit the subscribe button. I'm still fighting my way to our first 1,000 subscribers, and every single click truly keeps this channel alive. And tell me in the comment where in the world you are watching from. Your support inspires us to keep creating more emotional stories of resilience, healing and kindness. It was a Tuesday morning at 9:17 a.m., when his entire world went black. Not slow. Not glitching. Not a warning. Total system failure. Every screen at Orionics headquarters flashed red. Firewalls collapsed. Client data froze mid-transfer. Emergency alarms screamed through the glass and steel building off North de Anza Boulevard. Engineers sprinted between floors. Executives barked into phones. Analysts refreshed dashboards that refused to load. Walter stood in the executive war room, staring at a single sentence burning across the main monitor. His jaw tightened. His hands didn't shake. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that had stared down senators and CEOs, betrayed something close to fear. Within 8 minutes, federal regulators were on the line. Within 40 minutes, Orionics stock dropped 38%. By noon, class action lawsuits were being drafted. Walter made the call himself. Fly in the best. Spare no expense. Cybersecurity legends from Stanford arrived first. Then contractors from Lockheed Martin. Then a team that had worked NSA backdoors for a decade. Every single one of them hit the same wall. This wasn't a hack, one expert whispered, pulling off his glasses like he'd seen a ghost. It was designed to fail, another said, scrolling through lines of code that looped back on themselves like a maze with no exit. By 6 p.m., clients were threatening to pull contracts. His board scheduled an emergency vote to remove him as CEO. The man who built an empire on control had none left. That night, Walter walked the empty halls of Orionics alone. His reflection fractured across polished marble floors. The hum of servers, usually a comforting sound, felt like a death rattle now. Everyone had gone home. Engineers. Executives. Security teams. All of them abandoning the sinking ship. Everyone except one man. Caleb Bradley. Night janitor. Caleb had been cleaning these halls for 11 years. He knew which bathroom doors stuck. Which conference rooms smelled like burnt coffee. Which desks engineers slept under during crunch time. But to Walter, Caleb had always been invisible. Not invisible like a spy. Invisible like furniture. Like air. Like something that existed but didn't matter. Tonight, though, Caleb wasn't alone. Sitting cross-legged on the lobby floor, backpacks beside them, were his twin sons. Juan and Jesse Bradley. 13 years old. Waiting for their dad to finish his shift so they could all go home together. Walter almost walked right past them. Almost. Until he heard something that stopped him cold. "That's not ransomware," Juan said calmly, eyes fixed on a tablet. "That's a recursive lock trap," Jesse replied, tilting his head. Whoever wrote it expected everyone to panic. Walter froze mid-step. He turned slowly. 2 kids. Jeans and hoodies. Sitting on his lobby floor like it was recess. And they were looking at his company's collapsed system like it was a homework problem. What did you just say? Before we go further, if stories about overlooked people changing everything hit differently for you, this channel tells them every week. Real lessons. Real transformation. No fluff. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because what these two kids say next will shatter everything Walter thought he knew. Caleb shot to his feet. Sir, I'm so sorry, my boys shouldn't be. But Walter wasn't looking at Caleb. He was staring at the tablet in Juan's hands. Lines of code streamed across the screen. Not a game. Not YouTube. Not some kid's app. It was Orionix's system architecture. Live data. Metadata logs. API endpoints still broadcasting even though the main servers were locked down. Where did you get that? Walter's voice was sharp, but not angry. Confused. Juan looked up. No fear. No hesitation. Your public API logs, he said simply. They're still broadcasting metadata. Nobody shut that part down. Walter's chest tightened. He'd flown in the best cybersecurity minds in the country. Experts who'd built firewalls for the Pentagon. Professors who taught at MIT. And not one of them had thought to check the public-facing API logs. But a 13-year-old sitting on his lobby floor had. Jesse set the tablet down and stood up beside his brother. You want us to leave, we'll leave. But if you want to know what actually happened to your system, we can show you. Walter stared at them. How many brilliant people do we walk past every day because they don't look the part? Maybe it's the person who cleans your office. Maybe it's the kid bagging groceries. Maybe it's someone you've never even looked in the eye. What if the answer you've been searching for has been right in front of you the whole time? Leave a comment. Tell us who you almost missed. Caleb stepped forward, voice tight. Mr. Hale, we'll get out of your way. The boys were just keeping themselves busy while I finish up. No. Walter's voice was quiet. Firm. He crouched down to their level. Show me. Juan and Jesse exchanged a glance. Then Juan tapped the screen. See this timestamp? 9:17 a.m. That's when your system locked. But the lock didn't come from outside. It came from inside, Jesse continued. Someone didn't break in. Someone activated a kill switch that was already there. Walter's blood went cold. That's impossible. We have safeguards. Redundancies. Fail-safes on top of fail-safes. Yeah, Juan said. But fail-safes can be weaponized if the person who built them wants them to be. Silence. Caleb looked between his sons and his boss, clearly trying to figure out how two kids who'd never set foot inside a boardroom were dismantling a billion-dollar company's security infrastructure in real time. Walter stood slowly. His mind was racing. If what they were saying was true, this wasn't sabotage from a competitor. This was sabotage from within. From someone who knew the system intimately. From someone who built it. Can you trace it? Walter asked. Jesse nodded. If you give us access. That's classified systems. Federal contracts. I can't just. Then your company dies tonight, one said flatly. Your choice. Walter stared at them. Two kids. 13 years old. Sons of a janitor. And they were holding the only key to saving everything he'd ever built. He pulled out his phone. Come with me. Caleb grabbed his son's shoulders. Mr. Hale, they're just kids. I know, Walter said, already walking toward the elevator. That's why I'm listening. The elevator ride was silent. Caleb stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching his sons like they'd just walked into traffic. Juan and Jesse stayed calm. Focused. Like this was normal. Walter watched them through the reflection in the polished steel doors. 13 years old. He'd spent 19 years building Orionics. Hired Ivy League graduates. Paid seven-figure salaries to people with degrees longer than their names. And tonight, his entire empire rested in the hands of two kids whose father mopped floors. The doors opened on the executive floor. The war room was still lit. Whiteboards covered in failed theories. Empty coffee cups everywhere. Laptops abandoned mid-diagnosis. Walter gestured toward the main terminal. There. Juan sat down first. Jesse stood behind him, leaning over his shoulder. Their hands moved fast. Confident. No hesitation. Caleb stayed by the door, gripping his cleaning cart like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Walter stood behind the twins, arms folded, jaw tight. 40 seconds passed. There, Juan said, pointing at a block of code buried 6 layers deep. That's your trigger. Walter leaned in. His eyes scanned the module ID. His stomach dropped. That's mine. I wrote that. You rushed it, Jesse said, not looking up. See this timestamp? Deployed 3 years ago. Right before your Series C funding closed. You skipped the audit phase. Walter's throat went dry. He remembered that night. Investors breathing down his neck. Board pressuring him to hit the deadline. He bypassed protocol. Cut corners. Told himself it was temporary. He never went back to fix it. How do you know all this? Walter asked quietly. We read, one said simply. Your company publishes security white papers. Open source documentation. GitHub repositories. You'd be surprised what's public if you know where to look. 20 more seconds. Jesse's finger traced a line of code on the screen. And here's your kill switch. Walter felt the room tilt. That's from the Mercer lawsuit. Jesse nodded. 4 years ago. Wrongful termination case. You buried this failsafe so the system would lock instead of exposing internal communications if the case went to discovery. It was legal advice, Walter said, voice barely above a whisper. Our attorneys told us. It was fear, Juan interrupted, finally turning to look at him. The room went silent. Caleb shifted uncomfortably by the door. Walter stared at this kid. This 13-year-old who just diagnosed a problem that had stumped the best minds in Silicon Valley. You didn't lose control today, Juan said, eyes steady. You lost it years ago. When you chose fear over people. The words hit harder than any financial loss. Walter opened his mouth. Closed it. No defense came. Because Juan was right. Every shortcut. Every buried failsafe. Every person he'd pushed aside to protect his empire. It all led here. Can you fix it? Walter finally asked. Jesse nodded. We can bypass the lock. Restore access. Stabilize your data before clients wake up tomorrow. How long? 12 minutes. Walter blinked. The NSA contractor said it would take weeks. They were looking for an outside attack, Juan said, already typing again. We're looking at what you did to yourself. Walter stepped back. Let them work. Caleb caught his eye from across the room. The janitor's expression was unreadable. Not proud. Not angry. Just, watching. 9 minutes later, the system hummed back to life. Green indicators flooded the monitors. Data streams reconnected. Firewalls restored. Client alerts silenced. Jesse leaned back in the chair. You're live. Walter stared at the screens. His company. His life's work. Saved. By 2 kids who shouldn't have even been in the building. He turned to Juan and Jesse. They were already packing up the tablet, ready to leave like nothing had happened. "Wait," Walter said. They stopped. "Why did you help me?" Juan and Jesse looked at each other. Then at their father. Caleb spoke quietly from the doorway. "Because that's what you do when someone's drowning. You don't ask if they deserve it. You just pull them out." Walter's chest tightened. He'd spent 19 years at the top. And tonight, the people he'd never even noticed had saved him from the bottom. The sun rose over Cupertino, but Walter didn't see it. He sat alone in his office. Door closed. Lights off. The company was saved. Stock would recover. Clients would stay. The board would back down. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt hollow. On his desk, half buried under contracts and reports, was a photograph he hadn't looked at in 6 years. Two men. Mid-20s. Standing outside a garage in San Jose. Walter recognized his younger self immediately. Leaner. Hungrier. Smiling. The man beside him looked almost identical. Same nose. Same jawline. Same eyes. His brother. Daniel Hale. The real genius behind Orionics. Walter built the business. Raised the funding. Closed the deals. But Daniel built the technology. The encryption protocols. The core algorithms that made Orionics worth billions. Until Walter pushed him out. It started small. A disagreement over equity splits. Then creative direction. Then control. Investors liked Walter better. He was smoother. More polished. Better at selling the vision. Daniel was brilliant but difficult. Stubborn. Uncompromising. So Walter made a choice. He rewrote the founding documents. Diluted Daniel's shares. Took full credit for the algorithm Daniel had spent 3 years perfecting. By the time Daniel realized what happened, it was too late. Legal. But not right. Daniel left. Didn't fight. Didn't sue. Just walked away. 2 years later, Walter got the call. Daniel had died. Heart attack. 34 years old. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. Walter went to the funeral. Stood in the back. Didn't approach the family. He told himself it was better that way. The door to his office opened quietly. Caleb stepped inside, pushing his cleaning cart. "Sorry, Mr. Hale. Didn't know you were still here." Walter didn't turn around. "It's fine." Caleb started emptying the trash. Then he paused. Noticed the photograph on the desk. "That your brother?" Walter's shoulders tensed. "Yeah." Caleb nodded slowly. Didn't push. Just kept working. But then he spoke again, softer this time. "My wife left when the twins were babies. Said she didn't want a life where people get erased." Walter finally turned. Caleb wasn't looking at him. Just wiping down the window, voice steady. "She told me I was invisible. Not just to bosses or coworkers. To myself. That I'd spent so long being ignored, I started ignoring everyone else too. Even her. Even the boys." He set down the cloth. "Took me 2 years to understand what she meant. By then, she was gone." Walter stared at the janitor he'd never really seen before tonight. "You still talk to her?" Caleb shook his head. "She moved to Portland. Started over. I respect that." "Do the boys know?" "They know she left. They don't know why." Caleb picked up his cart. "I tell them the truth when they're ready to hear it. Not before." He moved toward the door. Then stopped. "Your brother. Did he know you were sorry?" Walter's throat closed. No. He died thinking I erased him. Caleb nodded slowly. Didn't offer comfort. Didn't say it would be okay. He just said, then maybe you're not done fixing what broke. The door closed softly behind him. Walter sat in the dark office, staring at the photograph. For 19 years, he'd built an empire on control. But control was just another word for fear. Fear of losing. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being less than the best. And that fear had cost him the one person who mattered most. His system didn't just fail today. It failed the moment he chose power over people. The moment he erased his brother to protect his ego. Juan's words echoed in his mind. You didn't lose control today. You lost it years ago. Walter closed his eyes. For the first time in 19 years, he let himself feel the weight of what he'd done. 3 days later, Walter called an emergency board meeting. The conference room was packed. 12 board members. Legal counsel. PR advisors. Executives who'd spent the last 72 hours doing damage control. Orionics stock had stabilized. Clients were staying. Federal regulators had backed off. The crisis was over. Everyone expected Walter to take a victory lap. Announce new security measures. Maybe fire a few scapegoats to appease shareholders. Instead, he stood at the head of the table and said 4 words no one saw coming. I'm stepping down. Effective immediately. Silence. Then chaos. Walter, you saved the company. We can't afford a leadership change right now. The market will panic. Walter raised his hand. The room went quiet. I didn't save the company. 2 13-year-old kids did. While I was too busy protecting my reputation to see the problem right in front of me. He looked around the table. At faces he'd known for years. People who'd made fortunes off his decisions. I built Orionics on control. On speed. On making sure I was always 3 steps ahead. And you know what that got us? A system designed to fail the moment I couldn't control everything. One of the board members leaned forward. So what are you saying? That we should hire children now? I'm saying we've been hiring the wrong people for the wrong reasons. Walter pulled out a folder. Slid it across the table. These are the executives who panicked during the crisis. Who screamed? Who blamed? Who ran? I'm canceling their bonuses. All of them. Gasps around the room. And these, he slid another folder. Are the engineers who stayed calm. Who kept working. Who didn't abandon ship. They're getting promotions. Equity. Decision-making authority. Walter, you can't just. I already did. Have you ever walked away from something you built because you realized it was built wrong? Not failed. Not broken. Just, wrong from the beginning. Maybe it was a job. A relationship. A version of yourself you couldn't carry anymore. That moment when you realize success doesn't mean anything if it cost you everything that mattered. Drop a comment. Tell us what you walked away from. He opened a 3rd folder. I'm also creating a scholarship fund. Full ride. Any child of a custodial, cafeteria, or security staff member can apply. Because intelligence doesn't come with a corner office. The CFO spoke up. Walter, this is admirable, but we need stability right now. Not gestures. This isn't a gesture, Walter said quietly. This is the only thing I've done right in 19 years. He looked at the legal counsel. Draft the paperwork. I want this done by Friday. And the first recipients, someone asked. Juan and Jesse Bradley. Murmurs around the table. A few board members exchanged glances. The janitor's kids, one of them said, not bothering to hide the condescension. Walter's jaw tightened. The kids who saved this company when none of you could. He stood. I'll stay on as an advisor. Help transition leadership. But I'm done making decisions that prioritize profit over people. One board member stood too. If you do this, I'm resigning. Then resign, Walter said simply. Two more stood. Then a fourth. Walter didn't flinch. Anyone else? Silence. He gathered his papers. Walked to the door. Then stopped. One more thing. When the press asks why I stepped down, tell them the truth. That I finally learned the difference between being powerful and being worth listening to. He left the room. Behind him, the board sat in stunned silence. Outside, Caleb was refilling the water station in the hallway. He looked up as Walter passed. Walter stopped. Extended his hand. Thank you. For what your sons did. And for what you said. Caleb shook his hand. You didn't have to step down, Mr. Hale. Yes, Walter said quietly. I did. Because some things can't be fixed from the top. Some things can only be rebuilt from the ground up. 6 weeks passed. Orionics restructured under new leadership. Stock stabilized. Clients renewed contracts. The tech press called it the most unexpected turnaround in Silicon Valley history. Walter stayed on as an advisor. No office. No executive privileges. Just a desk in the corner of the engineering floor, helping where he was needed. It was the first time in 19 years he didn't have a schedule packed 18 months ahead. It was also the first time he could breathe. One afternoon, Caleb knocked on his door. Got a minute? Walter looked up. Always. Caleb stepped inside. Behind him were Juan and Jesse. The twins had turned down the scholarship. Politely. Respectfully. But firmly. We don't need special treatment, Jesse had said. We just needed someone to listen, Juan had added. Walter had accepted their decision. Didn't push. But he'd wondered why they really said no. Now, standing in his small office, the twins looked different. Not nervous. Not hesitant. Determined. We want to ask you something, Jesse said. Walter gestured to the chairs. Sit. They did. Caleb stood by the door, arms folded, letting his son speak. Juan leaned forward. You stepped down because you realized you built this place wrong. Right? Walter nodded slowly. Yeah. So you know there are other people. People who helped build Orionics. People who got pushed out. Erased. Forgotten. Walter's chest tightened. Jesse continued. We want you to help us find them. Silence. Why? Walter asked quietly. Because fixing systems is easy, Juan said. Fixing trust takes longer. And you can't do it alone. Walter stared at them. These two kids who'd saved his company. Who'd seen through his walls in seconds. You want me to track down everyone I hurt. Not hurt, Jesse corrected. Erased. There's a difference. Walter looked at Caleb. The janitor's face was unreadable. You knew about this? Caleb shrugged. They asked if I thought you'd say yes. I said I didn't know. But I thought you'd listen. Walter leaned back in his chair. 19 years of building. 19 years of cutting people loose to move faster. To stay ahead. To win. And now two 13-year-olds were asking him to go back and face every person he'd left behind. What if they don't want to be found? Walter asked. Then you respect that, Juan said. But at least they'll know you tried. What if they hate me? They probably will, Jesse said bluntly. But that's not the point. Then what is? Juan looked him in the eye. The point is that you remember them. That you say their names. That you stop pretending they didn't matter. Walter's throat went tight. He thought about Daniel. About the funeral he'd stood in the back of. About the apology he never gave. About all the people he'd erased to protect his empire. Okay, Walter said quietly. Jesse blinked. Okay. Yeah. Let's find them. Caleb smiled. Small. Proud. Juan and Jesse stood. We already started a list, Jesse said, pulling out a notebook. Walter almost laughed. Of course you did. Because some things can't be undone. But maybe, just maybe, they can be remembered. The list was longer than Walter expected. 43 names. Engineers. Designers. Early employees. Partners. Contractors. People who'd built pieces of Orionics and left with nothing but non-disclosure agreements and bitter memories. Walter sat at his kitchen table that night, staring at the names Juan and Jesse had compiled. Some he recognized immediately. Others took longer. A few he didn't remember at all. That was the worst part. Not the ones he'd intentionally pushed out. The ones he'd forgotten entirely. He started with the easiest name. The one that hurt most. Daniel's widow. Rebecca Hale. She lived in Berkeley now. Taught computer science at a community college. Raised Daniel's son, Walter's nephew, alone. Walter hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. He called on a Thursday evening. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Short. Honest. Rebecca, it's Walter. I know I don't have the right to ask for your time. But I need to say something I should have said 6 years ago. I'm sorry. For what I did to Daniel. For taking credit. For erasing him. He deserved better. And so did you. If you're willing to talk, I'll be here. If not, I understand. He hung up. 3 days later, she called back. They met at a coffee shop in Oakland. Neutral ground. Rebecca looked older. Tired. But her eyes were still sharp. You look different, she said, sitting across from him. I am different, Walter replied. She studied him. Good. Because the Walter I knew wouldn't have made this call. They talked for 2 hours. Walter told her everything. The shortcuts. The stolen credit. The moment he chose his empire over his brother. Rebecca listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't forgive. But at the end, she said something Walter didn't expect. Daniel never wanted revenge, Walter. He just wanted you to remember him. Walter's voice cracked. I never stopped thinking about him. Thinking isn't the same as remembering, Rebecca said quietly. Thinking is what you do alone. Remembering is what you do with other people. You say his name. You tell his story. You make sure he wasn't erased. She pulled out her phone. Showed him a photo. A teenage boy. 15. Daniel's face. Daniel's smile. That's Marcus. Your nephew. He wants to learn to code. But he's afraid he's not smart enough. Walter stared at the photo. He looks just like him. He is just like him, Rebecca said. Brilliant. Stubborn. Terrified of being forgotten. She put the phone away. If you really want to make this right, don't just apologize to me. Teach Marcus. Show him that brilliance doesn't have to come with erasure. Walter nodded. I will. I promise. Rebecca stood. Good. Because I don't forgive you yet, Walter. But I'm willing to watch you try. She left. Walter sat alone at the table, staring at his coffee. 1 name down. 42 to go. Over the next 3 months, Walter, Caleb, Juan, and Jesse worked through the list together. Some people refused to meet. Some accepted apologies but wanted nothing more. Some cried. Some yelled. Some just listened. But every single person was remembered. Their names were spoken. Their contributions acknowledged. Their stories told. Orionics began changing. Not just structurally. Culturally. The new CEO implemented open forums. Transparent equity. Promotion paths for custodial staff. And every month, Walter stood in the lobby and read names. People who built Orionics. People who were forgotten. People who mattered. Caleb watched from the back, arms folded, a small smile on his face. His son sat beside him, taking notes. Because rebuilding isn't about erasing the past. It's about remembering it honestly. And letting that memory change you. 4 months after Walter stepped down, the offer came. Vortex Capital. One of the biggest private equity firms in the valley. They wanted to buy Orionics. All of it. The pitch was clean. Professional. Ruthless. You've done the hard work, the lead partner said during the presentation. You've stabilized the company. Fixed the culture. Now let us take it to the next level. Translation, strip the humanity. Maximize profit. Return to the old way. The offer was staggering. Enough to make every board member wealthy beyond reason. Enough to erase every financial scar from the crisis. Enough to make Walter a billionaire again. The board was split. 6 votes to sell. 5 to stay independent. Walter's vote would decide. He had 48 hours to choose. That night, he sat in his small apartment, staring at the offer documents. Everything he'd lost could come back. The penthouse. The power. The respect. All he had to do was let Orionics become what it used to be. His phone buzzed. A text from Juan, "Did you decide yet?" Walter stared at the message. He didn't reply. The next morning, Caleb found him sitting outside the Orionics building, coffee in hand, staring at the entrance. "You look like a man about to do something stupid," Caleb said, sitting beside him. Walter smiled faintly. "Or something right. They the same thing." "Sometimes." Caleb nodded. "The boys told me about the offer. What do you think I should do?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I think you already know. You're just scared to admit it." "Scared of what?" "That walking away from money is harder than walking away from control." Walter looked at him. "You ever regret staying? Being a janitor instead of?" "I don't know. Something bigger." Caleb shook his head. "Bigger doesn't mean better, Mr. Hale. I get to go home every night knowing I didn't erase anyone to get there. That's worth more than a title." Walter exhaled slowly. That afternoon, he walked into the board meeting. No presentation. No speech. Just a single sentence. "I vote no." The room erupted. "Walter, this is insane. We'll never get an offer like this again. You're throwing away billions." Walter stood. "I already lost everything worth keeping once. I won't do it again." One board member slammed his hand on the table. "Then you're a fool." "Maybe," Walter said calmly. "But I'd rather be a fool who belongs than a king who's alone." 3 board members resigned on the spot. 2 others threatened lawsuits. But the vote held. Orionics stayed independent. That night, Walter met Caleb, Juan, and Jesse at a diner in Sunnyvale. "You really turned down $3 billion?" Jesse asked, eyes wide. Walter nodded. "I did." "Why?" Walter looked at all 3 of them. "Because you can't put a price on not being afraid anymore. One smiled. That's the smartest thing you've ever said. And for the first time in 19 years, Walter believed it. 8 months later, Orionics held its first scholarship ceremony. Not in a ballroom. Not at a 5-star hotel. In the lobby where Juan and Jesse had first sat on the floor with a tablet. 15 recipients. Children of janitors. Cafeteria workers. Security guards. Maintenance staff. Kids who'd been invisible their whole lives. Walter stood at the podium. No script. No teleprompter. Just him. I spent 20 years proving I belonged at the top, he said quietly. Chasing titles. Building empires. Making sure everyone knew my name. He paused. And you know what I learned? Being at the top doesn't mean you belong. It just means you're alone in a place where no one can reach you. He looked out at the crowd. Families. Workers. Kids in their best clothes. These 15 students didn't get here because they had the right connections. They got here because they had the right hearts. And the right courage. And people who loved them enough to let them be seen. His voice cracked slightly. I almost missed that. I almost walked past brilliance because it didn't look the way I expected. He looked at Juan and Jesse, sitting in the front row beside Caleb. 2 kids sitting on a lobby floor saved my company. But more than that, they saved me. They reminded me that intelligence doesn't wear a badge. And courage doesn't come with a corner office. What's the difference between belonging at the top and belonging at all? Maybe it's the difference between being feared and being loved. Between being remembered and being missed. Between building an empire and building a home. Think about the people in your life who made you feel like you belonged, not because you earned it, but because you were you. Leave a comment. Tell us their name. Rebecca sat in the 3rd row. Beside her was Marcus, Walter's nephew. 15 now. Confident. Enrolled in his first coding class. Walter had kept his promise. Every Saturday, he and Marcus met. Not as CEO and student. As uncle and nephew. After the ceremony, families gathered. Photos were taken. Hugs exchanged. Caleb approached Walter, hand extended. You did good, Mr. Hale. Walter shook his hand. Call me Walter. Please. Caleb smiled. All right. Walter. Juan and Jesse joined them. So what's next? Jesse asked. Walter looked around the room. At faces he would have ignored a year ago. At people who'd been invisible. At a community he didn't build alone. I don't know, Walter said honestly. But whatever it is, I want to build it with people who won't let me forget where I came from. Jesse grinned. Deal. Walter Hale stopped being a man who ruled from the top. And became someone who finally belonged.